If you've been following my channel for a while, you've probably seen me use some pretty primitive methods to clamp up boards. I figure it's time to build something a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more reusable. What I have here is a pair of wedge clamps. They're adjustable by moving this piece up and down, and they're tightened by hammering these wedges in at the bottom. They're very simple to make. They've got no critical measurements, and it's a great project for beginners. Assembly and disassembly is very simple. Place your boards in place. You may need a shim to hold the wedges in the right position. Put your wedges in. Tap them tight with a hammer. I've never met a woodworker who said he had too many clamps, so I'm going to go ahead and make another 4. I've already gone ahead and ripped all the stock to width and cross-cut to length. This should be done on a table saw and perhaps a miter saw, although you can do the entire job with a circular saw the way I did. I'm not going to cover that here today. The fixed stops at the end are about 1.5 inches square and about 2.5 inches long, and the adjustable stops are about 1.25 inches thick, 1.5 inches wide, and about 4 inches long. These measurements aren't critical, they just happen to be what works for me. The first step is going to be to attach these fixed stops to the top of the bar. I'm going to glue this together, but even then, because it's a cross-grain joint, it won't be strong enough. So I'm going to drill pilot holes in the end piece and screw it all together. Now it's important, especially when working with small pieces of wood, that you have a real good grip on it, preferably a clamp. If you don't, there's a risk of it catching and spinning around and breaking your fingers. When I have all my pieces milled, I'm going to go ahead, put some glue on them. This clamp is on the side to help keep things from spinning while I screw it in. My next step will be to mark out all the holes for the adjustable cleats. To start with, I'm going to mark a line down the center of the board. I'll use a measuring tape to mark out holes every 2 inches. I'm going to start out with, let's say, 8 inches. I can't ever imagine using bar clamps to glue something smaller than that. Rather than use the measuring tape on each and every one of the clamps, I'm going to put them all together. Use my triangle square. And mark them all at once. Drilling these holes precisely in soft pine is not going to be easy unless I do a center punch first. If you don't have a center punch, just use a nail. Drill pilot holes in each of the locations for the holes. If you don't have a straight eye, use some sort of right angle nearby to act as a reference. I forgot to warn you, if you're working on top of your mom's good kitchen table, make sure you put a sacrificial piece of wood underneath so when you drill through you don't put a hole in the table. Once all the pilot holes are drilled, flip it over, and on the other side we're going to need to put in a recessed hole for the head of the carriage bolts. I'm using 3/8 inch carriage bolts. This is probably about the right size. A little larger, a little smaller also should work just fine. I do want to make sure the recessed hole is about the same size as the head of the carriage bolt. And I want to drill these holes just deep enough so that the carriage bolt does not protrude below the bottom of the clamp bar. If you're using a hand drill, don't be surprised if you can't get all of your holes neatly aligned. As long as they're close enough, there'll be no effect on the product, but it does look nicer. If you have a drill press, you should be able to get things a lot cleaner. Now that I have all the holes, the recess is done in the back, I'm going to go back to the front and drill the through holes. Now I'm using a 3/8 inch bolt. You'll find that if you use a 1/2 inch drill bit for the through hole, it'll be much easier to assemble and disassemble. Mark the end stops out for 2 holes. You'll want one to be 1 inch from the end and the other to be 2 inches from the end. This gives 3 positions for this block to be in. It can be centered here for a 1 inch distance, it can be centered here for a 2 inch distance, or it can be centered on the side for a 3/4 inch distance. Center punch your holes and drill your pilot hole with a small bit. Be sure to put your wood in a clamp for 2 reasons. One, for safety so it doesn't spin around, but also because the wood will tend to split without it. Change your bit out for a 1/2 inch so that you can put the final hole in place. If you're using a hardwood instead of working with soft pine, you only need 1 hole instead of 2. But these pieces are pretty small for pine. They're just going to split too easily, so I figured it's better to use 2 holes farther apart in a larger block. Most of the jobs I do would be much easier if cut on a table saw or with a miter saw. However, cutting wedges is one of the very few exceptions. You need a special jig to do this on a table saw, and I don't think you could even do it with a miter saw. Set up your fence so that you're cutting a wedge that is approximately 1 inch thick as its thickest and about 12 inches long, although the dimensions aren't really critical. The fine part at the end isn't really useful, so just knock that off with the saw. A scrap of wood like this will disappear pretty quick in a shop like mine. I like to put a lanyard on it so that I can hang it up and not lose it. Now that all the parts are milled up, give everything a good sanding. Notice I made a whole bunch of extra wedges. They're really useful to have around the shop. I'm always finding new uses for them. Also, if you haven't used a disc sander before, be sure to use it first on something you don't mind ruining. It's a tool that requires a little bit of practice to use, and it can destroy a project in seconds. Once all the parts have been sanded up to 120 grit, it's time to put on some stain and a top coat. If you build yours out of hardwood, you're probably best off using a nice oil finish. But since this is just pine, I'm going to use a polyurethane type finish on top. Once the stain is dried, according to the instructions on the can, brush on 2 or 3 coats of a poly finish on top. Place the 2 backbones down on a flat surface, and then set the 2 boards you want to glue together on top. Once you've located the best holes for the adjustable stop, insert the 2 carriage bolts and thumb tighten the washer and nut on top. Depending on the exact thickness of the glue up, you may need a shim to assist with the wedges. Using a shim anyway is a good idea to prevent any damage to the edge of the boards. Put the 2 wedges on either side and tap them in place until they are as tight as you need them to be. Then just let it set up. Clamps like these are cheap and easy to make. I only spent maybe $10 in materials total for all 6 of these clamps, and they only took me an afternoon to build. If you enjoy my videos, please click like and subscribe. I also enjoy getting comments from my viewers. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my videos. If you did, please click like and subscribe for more.